This is Radio Caravan, the world news read by Shabnam Modgil. Sri Lankan Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa's party has claimed a landslide victory as vote counting in the country's election came to a close last night, prompting fears among minority groups. The United States has recorded over 160,000 deaths due to the coronavirus till now, according to data compiled by the Johns Hopkins University. To stop its raging coronavirus outbreak, which is currently spreading at a rate of about 60,000 new cases per day, the United States can do one of two things. Either it can lock everybody down completely, or it can test everybody constantly. Unfortunately, the latest data shows that testing is falling across much of the United States. The average number of COVID-19 tests conducted per 1,000 people declined in the past week in 30 states, more than half the country. White House officials told Senate Republicans that if a deal is not reached with Democrats on coronavirus relief by today, negotiations will likely stop. Administration leaders and leading Democratic lawmakers ended a 3-hour meeting last night without resolving major differences over a new round of coronavirus relief, despite looming economic damage following the expiration of extra jobless benefits of $600 per week. Nearly 1.2 million people filed new unemployment claims last week, according to the Labor Department, marking the 20th straight week with more than 1 million initial applications for jobless benefits. President Trump said it was possible the United States would have a coronavirus vaccine before the November 3rd election, a more optimistic forecast on timing than anything suggested by his own White House health experts. And New York City opened new traveler checkpoints to register visitors and residents returning from nearly 3 dozen states who are required to quarantine for 14 days, an initiative that drew swift criticism from privacy advocates. The U.S. State Department dropped its global level 4 health warning, urging people not to travel abroad, but promptly reimposed that same advisory level on Mexico. An incomplete tunnel found stretching from Arizona to Mexico appears to be the most sophisticated tunnel in U.S. history. The tunnel, intended for smuggling, ran from San Luis, Arizona to a Mexican neighborhood and had a ventilation system, water lines, electrical wiring, a rail system, and extensive reinforcement. New York Attorney General has announced that she has filed a lawsuit in New York State Supreme Court seeking to dissolve the National Rifle Association. And President Trump made good on his threat to ban TikTok, issuing an executive order that will bar the wildly popular video app's parent company ByteDance from conducting business transactions with other American companies beginning in 45 days. Mark Zuckerberg's net worth passed $100 billion for the first time after Facebook hit a record high on optimism about the release of its TikTok competitor called Reels. Thanks to a marked shift among Republican voters since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, just 13% of Americans surveyed now say they are satisfied with the way things are going in the United States. The Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates has rejected a request from the Trump campaign to either add an additional general election debate or move up the calendar for the contests. President Trump billed his trip to Ohio as a chance to promote economic recovery yesterday, but he quickly pivoted to a deeply personal attack on Joe Biden, even questioning without foundation the former vice president's faith in God. Rescue teams were still searching the rubble of Beirut's port for bodies this morning, nearly 3 days after the massive explosion sent a wave of destruction through Lebanon's capital, killing nearly 150 people and wounding thousands. The UN Human Rights Office is calling for an independent investigation into the Beirut explosion, insisting that victims' calls for accountability must be heard. Lebanese authorities arrested 16 people over this massive explosion, and the countdown to catastrophe in Beirut started 6 years ago when a troubled Russian-leased cargo ship made an unscheduled stop at the city's port. The ship was trailed by deaths, crewed by disgruntled sailors, and dogged by a small hole in its hull. That meant water had to be constantly pumped out, and it carried a volatile cargo, more than 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, a combustible material used to make fertilizers and bombs, and it was destined for Mozambique. Of course, the ship, the Rosses, never made it to Mozambique, and now the Russian owner of the ship that carried the huge cargo of explosives to Beirut, which exploded years later, was questioned by Cypriot police. Beirut's blast destroyed Lebanon's only large grain silo, with plans for another in the country's second biggest port of Tripoli shelved years ago due to a lack of funding. Saudi Arabia has sent 2 planes to Lebanon carrying more than 120 tons of medicine, medical devices, emergency supplies, tents, shelter kits, and food items for people in Beirut, and the United States began delivering aid to Lebanon in the aftermath of the massive deadly explosion, amid long-standing concerns about how officials can ensure that supplies get to those in need and not to the Iranian-backed Hezbollah. The Trump administration's top envoy for Iran is stepping down just as the United States tries to move ahead with a major diplomatic effort that would extend a UN arms embargo against Tehran in the face of widespread international opposition. You're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. A traditional council met today in Afghanistan's capital to decide whether to release a final 400 Taliban prisoners, the last hurdle to starting negotiations between Kabul's political leadership and the Taliban under a peace deal with the United States. And Africa's confirmed coronavirus cases have surpassed 1 million, but global health experts say the true toll is likely several times higher, reflecting the gaping lack of testing for the continent's 1.3 billion people. Dozens are feared dead after a boat carrying migrants sank off Mauritania's coast. And Egypt and Greece have signed a maritime deal that sets the sea boundary between the two countries and demarcates an exclusive economic zone for oil and gas drilling rights. Britain faced for record-breaking temperatures today as forecasters warned the public to take additional care in this heat. And leader Kim Jong-un visited parts of southern North Korea, where days of torrential rains have flooded hundreds of houses and vast areas of agricultural land. AccuWeather meteorologists are monitoring the opportunity for a new tropical system to form in the West Pacific Ocean that could eventually result in more heavy rain for an already flood-weary portion of Asia. And Australia's second-largest city of Melbourne has entered the country's toughest lockdown yet, with new coronavirus rules put into place for 6 weeks. So while the rest of Australia continues to see only a handful of new infections daily, Melbourne, with its population of around 5 million, is still recording hundreds per day. A Chinese court has sentenced a Canadian citizen to death on drug-related charges, the second Canadian to receive the death penalty in as many days and the fourth from the country to be given capital punishment since Ottawa detained a top executive of the Chinese company Huawei in 2018. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper expressed concerns about Beijing's destabilizing activity near Taiwan and the South China Sea in a call to the Chinese defense minister. And the United States is negotiating the sale of at least 4 sophisticated aerial drones to Taiwan for the first time in a deal that is likely to further ratchet up Sino-U.S. tensions. China has deployed more amphibious weapons in coastal cities across the 110-mile-wide strait that separates China from Taiwan. China's expansion is finding new territories and unfriending new countries. Tajikistan, one of the smaller and poorer Central Asian countries, has been worried since Chinese official media has repeatedly said in the past weeks that the Pamir Mountains should be ceded to China. The Indian Army will continue to sit it out along the 1,597-kilometer line of actual control in East Ladakh till China restores status quo ante, after China's People's Liberation Army made an unsuccessful attempt to negotiate a new normal at the border. And in principle, government approval has come for the BCCI to take the IPL to the UAE this year, and the 8 franchises have started their preparations by initiating quarantine and COVID-19 testing protocols for their players and support staff. India's COVID-19 cases tally crossed 20 lakh mark with the highest single-day spike of 62,538 cases today. And rescuers retrieve at least 15 bodies and struggle to free around 50 others feared trapped under debris in Kerala's Idukki district this morning after torrential rains triggered a massive landslide in the area. Mumbai received the season's highest rainfall in just 12 hours and recorded 612 tree fall incidents. India's federal government named a former telecoms minister today to lead the restive region of Kashmir, where it has imposed new restrictions in the name of efforts aimed at stopping the spread of COVID-19. Manoj Sinha, leader in Prime Minister Modi's ruling party, will replace career bureaucrat G.C. Murmu as Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir. As a joint sitting of Parliament in Islamabad in a unanimous resolution today reiterated its complete rejection of India changing the special status of Kashmir on the 5th of August last year, Prime Minister Imran Khan lauded the UN Security Council for its latest meeting on the disputed matter. And the government in Islamabad allowed international flight operations in Pakistan to fully resume at all airports, and that will be from the 9th of this month. The Punjab province has witnessed a sudden increase in the number of COVID-19 new cases after Eid, and everyday cases, which had dropped to below 100 during the last 1 week, again increased to around 300, and the confirmed cases in the entire country 282,645, with 6,052 deaths reported. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all that I have in the news for you today on the 7th of August.